So title your notes, Literary Analysis Essays. I'm going to talk about analysis in general, but everything that I write on here, I'm just going to be kind of illustrating what I'm talking about. So if you just copy what's on here, it may or may not make sense to you. You might have to add some of the things I'm talking about too, so that when you go back to work on your essay, you know, the notes make sense and you can work on them from there. Okay, a few things about the way that I grade papers, because I know that that's a new thing for each new teacher, right? Sometimes you'll see that I've underlined something. I will tend to bracket off your thesis statement. And then as I'm reading the essay, I will underline when I start to see you touching on that thesis statement, right? If your thesis statement is in the beginning, it's supposed to outline mainly what your essay is about. So I have that in mind when I'm reading your paper, and every time I run into a spot where you're touching on your thesis, I'm underlining it because I'm noting that you're on track with your thesis. If I'm unable to underline, then that kind of is a signal to me that maybe you're a little off from your thesis, you're wandering over here, you're wandering over there, and I'm trying to find the thread that follows the thesis through the paper. So if it's underlined, it's not a bad thing, it's just me following your train of thought through the paper. Another way that I do that is with a check mark. So a check mark is sort of like a nod. I actually literally, when I'm grading papers, sometimes nod when I do the check mark, because it's like perfect for a check mark, right? Boop, boop. So it's kind of like me saying, that makes sense, that's a good idea, I'm with you, right? Good point. Sometimes I need a little shorthand to help me out because, you know, I have a lot of papers. The other thing I want to talk about with grading is overall scores. I know that some people come to my class sometimes and they're like, oh my God, she's so hard with the grades. I think an 80 is a good grade. I know you probably do not think that an 80 is a good grade. We're just going to have to agree to disagree. Agree to disagree. The good thing is that I will give you opportunities to improve on those grades, like with this revision. Or if you get a paper back and you just don't know what happened, come and talk to me, because I think that in reworking things is learning. So if you want to come and talk about a grade or anything like that, open door policy. The other thing is about a rough draft. So these were rough drafts. You had, you know, a little less than a class period to work on them. The grade that you're receiving on the rough draft is usually 20 points more than it would have been if it was a final. So if you had turned into me the essay that I gave back to you just this morning and said to me, this is my final draft, it would probably be graded 20 points less than what you're seeing on your paper right there. So if your paper says 80, if you turn that in as telling me that it was a final, meaning that it's been checked over, I've reworked it, I've added some things, I've improved on the paper, then you could expect about a 60. Because I'm expecting that during the process of changing from a first draft to a second or a third draft that there are improvements, that it's getting better. And my expectations go up as that happens, right? Plus, when you're typing it, you need to make sure that you have, you know, all your grammar checked. Do y'all use Grammarly? You need to use Grammarly. You can use the online Grammarly website, where you can just take your paper after you've typed it and copy paste it into the website, and it will help you figure out all of the issues with your paper, grammar and other things. But there's also a keyboard that you can use for your phone. So if you're one of those people that does your homework on your phone, I'm worried about your eyes for your future, but that's a side point. You can get, you know how you have the emoji keyboard? You can install the Grammarly keyboard. And then your texts and everything, your tweets can all be grammatically correct. Won't that be marvelous? And you can also download the Chrome extension for Grammarly. Isn't that a good thing? A lot of you are getting ready to go off to college and, you know, want to make sure that you have everything all in a row. Yeah. So Grammarly, I think, is a great thing. Plus, Grammarly sends you a weekly update about how you used it, bless you, how you used it last week. So it will tell you, you used 70% more unique words than the other Grammarly users. Or you were 90% more correct than the other Grammarly users. So you can almost learn over time. So if you get the Chrome add-on, then every time you're typing on your computer when you're in Chrome, it will like sort of underline something for you in red when you need to look at it, and then if you hover on it, it will tell you what you need to fix. So there really aren't any excuses for having the wrong your or anything like that when we type a paper. When we handwrite it, obviously that's an issue, because try as we might, our papers don't have Grammarly. They should invent that, right? When you're writing in your notebook paper. Grammarly notebook paper is the next invention. I want to be a millionaire. All right. So that's just about grading in general. Now let's talk about literary analysis. One of the key things that we focus on when we're writing literary analysis is that we are discussing literature, not retelling it. Now, sometimes when you're writing about a piece of literature, like in this case, you were writing about Beowulf and his 2 battles, sometimes you have to say, when Beowulf is fighting Grendel's mother and he's about to lose because she's pinned him down. That's okay, because you're kind of giving context for the comment that you're about to make. But if you look on your paper, the one I just passed back to you, if your body paragraph is mainly summary, then you're kind of what we call off mode. You're writing summary instead of looking and making a discussion about what you're reading. So in some cases, I might have even made a bracket and said this is mostly summary. And summary is kind of like the default. When we don't know what to do, we summarize, because it's something we've been doing for a really long time. But I want you to be aware of when you're summarizing and when you're analyzing. What's the difference?
Summary is bringing everything back that you just wrote.
Repeating, right.
Analyzing is correcting what you have wrong.
No, analyzing, when we're just talking about writing the paper in the first place, analyzing is when we're looking at the details and we're making decisions and judgments about what we read. Here's an example that will help you remember the difference for when you're revising. Say that your best friend went on a first date. And it's after that, and it's like the next day, and you're asking your friend about how it went. If your friend says, oh, well, we went to Whataburger, and we had dinner. He had a double meat with bacon. You're all hungry now, right? Thinking about it. And then we went to a movie. We went to see that new It movie, the second one. And it was okay, but I'm not a big fan of scary movies, so, you know. And then we went home. He seemed like he wanted to kiss me, but he didn't. But maybe, you know, he didn't. That's basically a summary. What questions do you have for your friend?
Did she walk home? Did you drop her off?
Right. How do you feel about her, right?
Why did you kiss her?
Right. So there's all these questions. And so then analyzing the date, what does it mean that he didn't give her a kiss, right? All that stuff is analysis. So there's a difference between just saying what happened and looking into the judgments and the deeper concepts of that event. So if you have too much summary in your paper, maybe that's a revision point for you. If you take away the summary, what have you got left? Some people do kind of some summary and some analysis, but a lot of times people just rely on summary. So watch that. The other thing to remember, well, over here, you can say, assume that your reader already knows the piece of literature. You don't have to summarize Beowulf for me. I've read it, right? So if you go on the assumption that whoever's reading your paper already knows the whole story, why would you summarize it for them? Like, why would you summarize a date if it was a double date and you were with them? You were there, I don't need to summarize that date for you, right?
You summarize a book to the author.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't need to summarize the book to the author. All right. Another thing is that you do not have to write in chronological order. You're just going to pick out the key elements that you need to support your thesis. So instead of talking about everything that happened in the order in the fight between Beowulf and Grendel, if I know that there are 3 key things that I'm going to touch on to say the similarities and the differences, then I really only need to talk about those 3 things. So I don't have to go through every event to get to my compare-contrast. I can just pull out the ones that I need. I didn't really notice this as an issue so much in this class as I did in my 4A class, but I'll put it on the notes anyway. Make sure that when you are analyzing, you're not listing. Summarizing is not good, and listing is not good. Oops. Listing doesn't really go into depth. It's better to go and talk about 1 to 2 comparison elements in this case, or 2 characteristics, and go in depth, than to talk about 5 or 6 items. That's going to be very superficial.
That's just better what? Better deep?
Better to be deep, right? In other words, it's better to present 1 or 2 ideas and really explain them than it is to present 5 or 6 ideas and not really talk about them at all in your essay. Now, if I said we're writing a 15-page paper, then you might have 5 or 6 things that you need to go into because it's going to be a complicated thesis. But most papers, most AP exam essays are 3 pages or so, handwritten. We're going to get there. All right, questions so far? Anything I can clarify for you? All right, so let's talk about thesis statement. Why is thesis super important?
It's pretty much telling you what everything's going to be about.
It drives the paper, yeah. Teachers are always talking about thesis statements. The big deal is that the thesis drives the paper. What happens if we put a car in gear and there's no driver and we get started? Accident, right? A wreck, big old mess. So that's why a paper needs a thesis, because everything that happens in the paper is going to go back to that idea. There shouldn't be anything in the paper that doesn't reflect the thesis. So it should take you a little while to craft a thesis statement. Make sure that you're covering everything that you want to cover. Lots of times you'll see that I will put a bracket around your thesis statement on the side, or I'll mark thesis. That's letting you know that I found your thesis. If I can't find a thesis, then I'm not sure what your paper's about. And usually what that results in is a paper that is sort of like somebody was writing and then they thought, what should I say next? Oh, and they think of something, what should I say next? Oh, and they just keep doing that, and what happens? You keep getting farther and farther off track and nothing kind of meshes together. That's super obvious. So when you're writing a first draft, if you're always stopping and going, what should I put next? You're probably not connecting to the previous idea. It's going to be a very disconnected paper. So your thesis will help you, really crafting that sentence and then looking back to it as you're working on your body paragraphs. So once you've gone through your whole thesis statement and proven everything that you've written, the essay's over, right? You're not going to put anything in there that's not in the thesis statement. You're not going to stop writing the paper until you've covered everything. So your thesis is also guiding how long your paper is going to be, how many paragraphs you're going to have, and all that stuff. Okay? So in this case, your thesis statement needed to be a statement that answers the topic. This topic was about the topic. This one was about, where's my copy of it? Here it is. Comparing the first battle that Beowulf has with Grendel to the second one. I put a lot of instructions on here because I knew I wasn't going to be here in class. But it's an analytical essay right here, which means, no summary. And compare and contrast. So we're looking for both of those things. So if both of those things should be in the paper, then they should also be in the thesis, right? So look at your thesis statement right now. Did you specifically say what elements you were comparing and contrasting? Or did you write kind of a vague thesis statement that sort of said, there are similarities and differences between the two battles that Beowulf has? That's too general, and you need to say what those are. So what are the comparison points, and what are the differences? That gets stated at the very beginning of the paper. All right? If you can't think of it right away, and you're kind of working yourself into it, then go back and change it when you figure it out. But just saying that there are similarities and differences is too simplistic for the kind of paper that we're writing. All right, so it needs to be specific. In this case, we needed to talk about the similarities and the differences. I read one really cool paper. Well, I read a number of cool papers, but the one I want to talk about did this really neat thing where they said, you know what? There's the similarity that Beowulf is ultimately victorious, but the way he's victorious differs. So in that case, the differences came from the similarity. Right? So that's a little more sophisticated way to do a paper. You could say, here are all the similarities, here are all the differences, and that's fine. But it's a little more sophisticated to say, this is a similarity, and from that similarity, it's handled differently in the two cases. It's more elegant to do that.
So in that example, you could be like, the similarities would be how he beat both Grendel and Grendel's mother, but the difference is how he killed them.
How he killed them, or the difficulty level that he had in each one, or the location, right? So if you connect those two, the similarities to the differences, it's like a little elevated there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a paper that did that, and I thought that it was really, really intelligent to do that. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is structure. All this is to help you with your revision, right? So you have to keep like things together. So everything in a paragraph has to be on the same subtopic. You should have multiple paragraphs. There were some people who just wrote me one jumbo paragraph, so paragraphing is important. How do you know when you should break a paragraph and make a new one?
When you're going to the next category.
When you're shifting ideas. So when you go back to your thesis and you're like, okay, now let me deal with this other part of my thesis, change the paragraph. We'll talk about topic sentences when we do another essay later on, but paragraphing is important. Even with a first draft, because it helps to organize your ideas. Now, there were two main ways that I saw people structure this paper. The first way was where they wrote about the battle with Grendel. Then the second part of obviously they had an intro and they had a conclusion. But there were two main parts to the body. They wrote about the battle with Grendel. Lots of times those were very summary heavy. And then in the second part of the body, they wrote about the battle with Grendel's mother. I'll just put GM, Grendel's mother. Now, some of those were successful because they went ahead and, as they were talking about the second battle, said things like, unlike the battle with Grendel, the battle with Grendel's mother does this. So they were kind of bouncing off what happens in the second battle, bouncing it off of the first one.
So as the similarities, they were showing the differences.
Right. So they laid out what happened in the first one, and then as they were explaining what happened in the second one, they were sort of saying this is similar to this or different from the original battle. So but without the arrow, you just have pretty much summary. And putting two things side by side is not a comparison contrast. Right? You have to make the observations for your reader. The other thing that I saw in terms of structure was where somebody talked in the first, well, there's an intro and there's a conclusion, right? In the first part of the body, they talked about the similarities. And the second part, they talked about the differences. Now, I'm not saying either one of those is better. I'm just saying that there are multiple ways that you can set up an essay. And it just needs to work with your thesis statement. The only thing that wouldn't work is if somebody wrote this type and they never bounced these ideas off of the first one. Then you just have two summaries of two battles. Right. You also, that makes a good point, and that is that you want to make sure that there's sort of an even distribution of compare and contrast. I saw some people who, I don't know if they ran out of time or what, but they sort of had a whole bunch of contrast, like 2 or 3 body paragraphs, and then there was like this much of a comparison at the end. So it could be that they ran out of time because, you know, class was finishing. But you do want to have sort of an even distribution. If it's a compare contrast or a problem solution or something like that, you kind of have to make it pretty even between talking about the comparison and talking about the contrast. So that's another thing you can look at in your revision process is, did I over contrast or did I over compare, and that didn't leave a lot of space for me to do the other. I'm not saying that it has to be the same number of words or anything like that, but when we think about the essay, about half of it should be comparison and the other half roughly contrast. All right, are there any questions on those general principles? No? So this is your starting place for your revision. Another thing you can do is I tried to make comments on your own paper as I was reading. So there'll be questions, there'll be things where I made notes on the side, etc. All of that is designed to help you. This is stuff for the whole class, the stuff on your papers for that paper that I was making the comment on. So let's talk about due date. I'm going to put the assignment on Google Classroom for you. Yeah, so the next draft I want you to type it. Now's the time to use Grammarly. I think that by the time we get to a second draft, it should be pretty clear of errors. So you should proofread. Sometimes, I don't like to do this, but sometimes I have penalized people 5 points for every grammatical error in a final draft. Because by the time it's a final, there shouldn't be any errors. Yeah. I'm not going to penalize you in a rough draft, but in a final for sure. So this is going to be due on Sunday at 6 p.m. or sooner.
And the app is called Grammarly?
Grammarly.
And that's only used for your keyboard? Or like
there's a keyboard, there's a Chrome add-on, and there's a website.
There's not an app where you can like, take a picture and it scans it and tells you where the errors are?
No, but you can copy-paste it and put it on the website, and it will tell you. This is going to be on Google.
Sunday at 6 p.m.
I don't care what time your football game is. Do it on Saturday if you're all into your football game on Saturday. I don't consult the football schedules when I make due dates. But I think in general students like weekend due dates instead of Friday due dates. Is that accurate?
No.
If you don't, well, you can think of your deadline as Friday.
No.
Early's fine, right?
You get
Early's
extra
fine.
credit for
Late
it?
is not fine.
Extra credit for it?
No, but you can enjoy your weekend. That's your extra credit.
That's true. I guess. Well, I work this week.
So I'll put the assignment on the Google Classroom, right? On Friday we'll talk about formatting and how that needs to get set up and all that stuff. But I also want to extend an invitation to you. If you're looking at my comments or your grade or whatever and you're like, wow, I really need some help with this, I'm here after school every day. I'm here at 7:30 in the morning. We can also communicate through Google. So if you want some help, free of charge, it's not going to cost you any points or anything like that. If you work on a revision and you want to kind of check it with me, have me look it over, you can drop by, you can send it to me, say, I know it's not due till Sunday, but would you look it over and give me some feedback? I'll be glad to do that for you. It's probably the last grade we're going to have for the 6 weeks, so it's probably important to you overall for your average, yeah. So just be aware that I don't stay up all night waiting for emails of student work. So if you send it to me at 12:30 in the middle of the night, I'm asleep because I'm a middle-aged lady. So I'm not taking classes right now. So when I see it the next morning, I'll take care of it. So I had a student last year who was like, you never answered my email. I'm like, it's 8 a.m. and you sent it to me at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like, what do you, I don't have, it's not like the bat cave, right? Like, it's not a bat signal saying it's time to work on a paper. I'm pretty good at getting to things, but you have to, be reasonable about it.